yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today, because today we have a very popular, beloved book on our hands, Dylan. We've got The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. And, this one has been on the TBR for me for a while. I even had started reading it at one point when I was on my vacation last year. And we've been blazing through the Stormlight archive. And those are like huge, epic fantasy, like sword and sorcery, knights fighting, like detailed magic
blazing
systems.
is generous.
Well,
at times it felt like we were plodding through the Stormlight archive, but yeah, we made it all the way through, at least all the way through all the released books, and then we completely shifted gears.
Yeah,
when it
we
comes
also
to
read the
House in
Greenbone
the
Saga,
Cerulean
which
Sea.
had plenty of drama.
That we did.
We read The Black Tongue Thief, and people were getting eaten alive in that book. So, we've been going through a lot.
Although there was threat of people being eaten alive by cannibals in this book, at least imaginary threat of that. The cannibals never quite struck.
No, this pretty
the
much
House in the Cerulean Sea.
Well said. This keeps a pretty PG rating, and we chose it specifically for those reasons. I was like, Dylan, we need a palate cleanser. We've got other books on the short-term list to read for the show, but this one was, to me, stood out as the good feels, fun story, relax, have a good time, peace and love, all over the place kind of vibes. And so that's why we chose it, and that's what we hope to bring to this episode today. Isn't that right, Dylan?
That is right. This was a palate cleanser. I felt like I was, having some of that spicy tuna roll when it came to the Black Tongue Thief. I felt like then I was, hitting the Stormlight archive, and I had some salmon. And then finally I'm like, let me get some ginger in the mix here, because my mouth is starting to taste pretty fishy. And The House in the Cerulean Sea was just like that delicious bit of ginger that you come away from and you're like, all right, I'm ready to go read The Rage of Dragons next, because that's going to be another epic fantasy full of blood. So,
oh yeah, I'm in the first scene, people are getting killed in all kinds of spectacular ways in quite a bit of detail. But Dylan, ginger is a good one, but I would also, maybe it's like a green tea ice cream, like a sweet dessert.
Ooh.
Fresh
That's
in
better.
the palate.
Yeah, I was just...
Or strawberry ice cream. Anyone?
But I feel like that comes at the end of the meal. So then I like the sweetness of it, because The House in the Cerulean Sea,
right. That was
sweet
kind of the
is a
metaphor
perfect
I was
descriptor of it. Yeah, but the end of the meal aspect, because we're diving back into more more sushi after this. So I see it though. Sweet, definitely. I think this is probably the book that most fits the descriptor of sweet of any that we have read on this entire podcast. Do you agree with that one?
I would definitely agree, and I'm more than thankful for it, and I think the world is more than thankful for it, at least America, because it's a New York Times bestseller, USA Today bestseller, Washington Post bestseller, all kinds of best books of not just fantasy, but best books, period, when it came out, including, I think it was in the Goodreads runnings too, if I'm not mistaken. So just absolutely beloved by anyone that comes across it. So it was a Goodreads Choice Award nominee for Best Fantasy in 2020. So yeah, all good things here. And I also feel like I feel like every time I walk into Barnes & Noble, I see these books being prominently featured,
touted.
Yeah. So nothing but love for this book. So I was finally the curiosity got the better of me, and the need for this kind of story couldn't have been higher after finishing Rhythm of War. So super. To me, it meant that it scratched that itch, and it was very satisfying, and it was the perfect length. You could fit like 6 of these in Rhythm of War, but it was a good length. It was a good story, good vibes all around. That was my experience anyway.
I had the same exact experience, Charles. This delivered. Sometimes a book gets hyped up a lot, and you're like, all right, I don't know. I don't know if this is going to quite hit what everyone is saying it's going to hit.
Exactly.
But I think also the way that the book is pitched is really accurate, which is not always the case. I think we had a whole conversation on The Black Tongue Thief where we were like, love that book, 5-star read from both of us. But we came away like, I don't feel like the way people are trying to sell this book is accurate to what The Black Tongue Thief ended up being. This book, I feel like, is exactly what everyone is saying it is. It is heartwarming. It is sweet, like we said earlier. It is relatively easy reading, and it's just, it's fun. I think it's V.E. Schwab called it, this is on the front of my book, said, I loved it. It is like being wrapped up in a big gay blanket, simply perfect. And I think that it's like, it is, that feeling of just coziness that that she's getting at totally fits. And I'm very happy.
Sincere too. It's not like a story that is necessarily pandering or like a Lifetime movie where it's like stupid. It's actually it's even though it could be like, it kind of has those Lifetime movie vibes, but I don't want to sell
after school special.
Yeah, it's like here you've got the like everyday boring guy, and all of a sudden here's this beautiful person who runs this exotic, orphanage, I guess you call it, right on the beach, and you're like, ooh, could he be the one for me? Like, I don't know.
It is one of those.
They have the falling. Well, we should probably get into spoiler alert territory before I go any further. But I think it's time for.
I think you went just far enough that is okay for this section.
I think so.
But
well.
Let's
highly recommend.
I think
check it out if you haven't. And I think, Dylan, we're ready for one of your famous spoiler warnings.
Yeah, this one's pretty simple. If you haven't yet read The House in the Cerulean Sea, we're going to have a no-holds-barred conversation about it where we get into full spoilers. So you might want to turn this down in your headphones if you're not looking to have anything spoiled for you, and definitely check out this book because it is fantastic.
Well said, Dylan. And then I think that allows me to continue my point a little bit. It does have like the that like near the end where they break away and then they come back together, and it is that story arc. Yeah.
Yeah, the rom-com always has to have that moment where they sort of break apart and they reflect.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually that reflection leads to reuniting. It's a very rare rom-com where that doesn't happen. So, I don't know. You got me thinking about A House in the Cerulean Sea, a little rom-com movie. It's got the extra bits to it, which is why I went after school special, which is like all the kids learning to accept themselves and love each other and like come
all the
to
supernatural
see
stuff and the jokes and all that.
Yeah, so it's kind of got a nice mix of, and just the themes are very after school, especially among what the kids learn about themselves and learn about the world. It also does, the only part that really surprised me in this one was the like exploration of prejudice and the way that especially the kids and being magical beings, how that's used as kind of a stand-in for both the way that in general, like orphans and like folks who come from more troubled backgrounds are viewed as being kind of like by nature sometimes, like obviously falsely believed to be like something inherently wrong with them, or like, oh, they come from some sort of like damned background where they'll never be able to be molded and shaped into productive members of society. And I think that's like rampant in how people often like view orphaned folks, and even like making the metaphor real through the like Lucy is literally the son of the devil. So it's like sometimes people have this prejudiced view where like that person comes from bad stock, their nature is bad, they'll never be good. And then with Lucy, it's like, all right, this person's literally from the devil. So, and I love, that's part of what we talked about in our like why we love fantasy discussion way back when we recorded an episode on that. That's 2 years plus ago. But we were talking about how you get to make something that's kind of like a metaphoric issue. It's like, and then make it, what if we make this literal and explore these themes through that lens? And I love how the House on the Cerulean Sea approaches it. I didn't think there'd be like themes about serious matters like prejudice.
Right. I wasn't really quite expecting that plot thread either, but one of the things that I like most about the book is TJ Klune's approach to all of his themes. I thought they were very thoughtful, very considerate, and nuanced as well. You know, you've got some of these, like, granted, there's like obviously like people in the town are like objectively bad, but it's always approached from this understanding around, well, there's like all this ignorance in the world, there's this bureaucracy in the world getting away from us, and maybe I've like worked too hard to isolate the kids. You know, there is a little bit of ownership on both sides, and they really do kind of talk it out in a book that's overall very, I'm going to say simple, but you know what I mean, where it's like, it's presented as to be a fun, entertaining story, and it's not really like a nuanced take on prejudice, but it is too. And I think the fact that he was able to... I think
it is, yeah.
It is. And the fact he was able to kind of convey that in what is often described as like a light, feel-good read, it is a really impressive skill.
Yeah, the way that, for example, TJ Klune has some of the townsfolk, like there's J-Bone, who's definitely indulging in definitely indulging in some extracurricular activity. He talks about growing his own plants, and I think we can figure out that that's probably weed. And J-Bone is like, he's all like, oh, like, little Lucy, like, you're radical, dude. Like, he's all like, he's an example of someone who like is not super judgmental or prejudiced against these kids. And then his coworker Marty is the complete opposite, like trying to exercise Lucy. So I think that it'd just be super easy, like low-hanging fruit for TJ Klune to be like, and all the townspeople were bad and mean and racist. And it's like, well, I think this kind of mirrors the like real world experience of folks who come from minority groups that face this prejudice, where there are people out there. And it's interesting because they kind of stress that a lot of them are younger folks who have more, accepting and inclusive views on the magical being. So even if those folks still make mistakes, like there's Helen, the mayor, like even if Helen's still having some issues truly understanding things, like she's trying, as are some of these other folks. And I don't know, that's the nuance to me. I feel like some stuff that can get kind of preachy
Oh
is
yeah.
when it's like, and all the townspeople are bad, like, and you're bad, reader.
Right. Right. It's so easy to make a villain who's just got like a southern twang and is like, "You're the Antichrist. I exorcise you. Go back to where you came from." Like it's way too easy to just have that be your, I'm gonna say, straw man for your narrative. And those characters are represented in the story, but it's a lot more nuanced than that. And there's characters with good intentions, like the mayor, who maybe needed to meet some of these kids to recognize some of her own, bias just from having never gone to the island. And she's the mayor, So it was just, it was really appreciated. I think of how many times, like, think of a modern Disney movie or something where they their choice to bring in, I'm gonna say, representation, and their choice to bring in like some of these themes that TJ Klune has brought in can be kind of like, insincere, and they can be a bit straw manny, and like, the person's so
Yeah.
like good just to be good, and then this person's just bad to be bad, and they go at each other. And I think this is why TJ Klune's book is being so celebrated, because he was able to bring so much honesty and heart into this discussion and make it feel very like connectable, not just within the LGBT community, which it's certainly beloved, but outside of that as well, to become a national bestseller across multiple genres. And I think that's because he tells a human story at the heart, and he knows how to be honest to his characters and to his themes without trying to, push like anything to one side. And I'm very impressed by it. It's like you go in thinking you're getting like a light popcorn rom-com, and you come out being like, more people should be reading this, and like expanding their like being more open-minded. That's what I like about it.
Yeah, that's really well said, Charles. And I think that nuance is even extended to the idea that Linus is like, it's interesting. I feel like the caseworker coming in to investigate the orphanage and see if everything's up to snuff, who's super how would we describe Linus, like, and his rule abiding ways? Like, what's a good word for that? He's
Yeah,
like very because it's
he's very.
not, I don't want to say anything that has a bad tint to it, because he's so well meaning,
No,
but
he's
he's just
very
so like
thorough and bureaucratic and
conscientious about his,
administrative and
yeah,
by the
rule
book,
abiding is just,
rule
yeah.
abiding. Yeah.
So anyway, that person feels like they would not be the main character in typical book. Like, you could totally see Arthur being the main character of like a typical book about this. Like, I'm trying to save my orphanage, and here comes this like rule abiding guy, and we have to sell this to him, and almost the caseworker becomes a villain in those stories. Eventually, you could see them coming around and learning and all that kind of stuff, but they're seen as this like antagonistic force that might shut down your orphanage. And instead, we get Linus as the main character, which is super cool, and we get more insight into his motives and how much he cares about the children, and just the way that he has always, I guess, naively seen adhering super close to the rules as a way of doing that. So I love the choice to make Linus the main character instead of someone like Arthur.
Absolutely. He's definitely not your typical fantasy hero, that's for sure. And
No.
a lot of the attributes attributed to him, like, he's in really interesting balance of traits, right? When you think about it, where he's like doesn't have any friends really, and he's not aggressive at all, but he is very much good at his job and prideful. And so it's this interesting balance that's kind of created. He looks very unassuming, but he does have a strong drive to do the right thing for these these children that he takes on almost as wards, not just in the Cerulean Sea, but like even in the prologue where he's meeting with kids. You can tell he goes that extra mile. But what's well balanced about it is, he goes the extra mile, but when Arthur really challenges him, it's like, hey, what do you think happens when you recommend to close a school? And it's like, well, that's out of my purview. It's out of my scope of responsibility.
Right.
I'm following the rules. I do my job, and then I move on. And that's a trait that you want for the job. But then when you actually consider how the implications it has on real people and children, and he starts to change his ways. So it's a very unique character moment in fantasy. Like, sure, we get people being challenged all the time, especially like, oh, you work for the government, but have you considered the government was bad? It's like, oh, you're doing the right thing, but you like, how much of this is you looking away? Like, did you even consider that like your job is structured not necessarily to help kids? So it's a very interesting character, that Linus Baker.
For sure. And the telling of a more small-scale, intimate story allows for, over the course of about 400 pages, Linus's shift from, like, I care about kids, but I've always, like, had a very limited view on what it means to care about kids in my role, like a structured view. And then coming to like let these kids into his heart and open himself up to things like love and the relationship as well, and like that transformation it's very realistic over the course of the novel. While there's 400-page novels that we've read where someone goes from like a really unassuming like a farm boy. Not that Wheel of Time is a good example of this because that's what that seems to elicit for a lot of folks, because that takes place over many, many, many pages. But we've read stories where over the course of 400 pages, someone goes from like very unassuming to like, and now I'm the hero of the world. And it's like, that's a hard character development to do in a way that feels true, but in that amount of time. I've learned to be like open myself up more, and I've learned to be I guess I'm trying to think of again the right word to go from like I'm really rule abiding and structured to like I am willing to play a little bit more fast and loose with the rules for the like greater good of these kids. Like that can happen very naturally, and it feels rewarding because you're like, I buy that this is happening.
Right. Well, what's interesting is he's allowed his personality and his sense of self and his thoughts and beliefs to come into what he does, which he's pushed out, and you can almost see how he's isolated himself in his whole life, right? And this is all part of that. And what's interesting about the character is, yes, part of that is him like being good at his job, but the other greater part of it is his overall character and his view of himself, right? He doesn't think about he has no ambition, you could say. Like, he's happy where he is. He's not trying to meet people. His neighbor is always trying to push her grandson on him, and he's always
complacent,
like,
really,
he's complacent. That's the
happy.
Perfect word, right? Not happy, complacent. So, but that's like he built those walls around himself, right? So, as we watch his sense of self get improved just by being around people that care about him, we watch that affect his job, and we watch his job change with it. And I think that's the element of humanity that TJ Klune was able to pull, not just into Linus Baker, but the whole cast. The way he was able to pull heart and humanity into this story is probably his greatest skill in this book, I would think. And I say humanity, even though we've got the Antichrist and wyverns and gnomes and things, but you get what I'm saying. This love, I'll say, that he was able to bring, and these like honest moments throughout the whole book, these 400 pages, and the interactions that they have. It's not all plot fulfilling narrative dump. Here's why I'm doing this exposition stuff. It's, hey, we're just gonna go on an adventure and have fun. We're gonna like get ice cream. We're gonna buy records, and you live in that moment with those characters. And the humanity he builds in, like Linus starts to, and the book presents it as almost like unknowingly he starts to have that extra button come down. He loses his tie, and he's like, oh well, I guess I don't need that.
Well, he's running out of buttons, Charles, because he keeps giving them away to Theodore.
Right.
I mean, buns are at a premium.
That's true.
Later in the book. And that does lead into, I guess we should talk some about the kids, because some of them, especially Lucy, go through some, really, Lucy is the only one that I'd say has an action. Oh, no, Sal as well. I would say those two really have character arcs. The other kids, they grow to some extent, but for the most part, I would not say that they go through too many arcs. And maybe I'm missing one. But I guess we should start with Lucy. It's interesting. Lucy kind of got on my nerves a little bit at the start of the book. And it's just because, I know that this was done intentionally, but the whole, like, Lucy is just being a total edgelord. It was just a little too much for me, that it was like every line, it felt like every page or two I was like, I get what you're doing with Lucy. But it does set the stage for Lucy's development to be really rewarding, and as you see his like true self come out, and how much he actually cares about those around him, including eventually Linus, it makes that more fulfilling, I think.
Right, you get to see like that over the top edgelord humor can in many cases be a mask for the insecurities or the depression that they have going on personally. And it's only after we spend more time with Lucy and like overnight you see the nightmares and the way people treat them that this is like a mask. You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the show Bob's Burgers with Louise.
Does it now?
Yeah, because she's the same way. I
haven't watched a lot of Bob's Burgers, though. Okay.
I get a lot of very similar vibes from this show that I do for Bob's Burgers. It's like a very modern, loving family dynamic, but they have their own unique way of communicating. They're right on the sea, except they're in New Jersey, I think, or New Jersey-esque vibes.
Jersey Shore.
Yeah, and, Lucy, there's some similarities to be had here. But she's the same way, where it's just like over the top.
So you gotta squint a little bit.
No, but it's just to say that it's this over the top, like, I'm an edgelord, look at me make jokes about, like, people eating you or your eyes being gouged out or whatever other highly creative but mature things I can think to say to shock you, can sometimes be a mask for the extreme emotions that they're feeling and don't know how to process. And I think that was captured well with Lucy as we got to know her. It's like, yeah, I do think the whole book, and not just Lucy, him, right, him, thank you, is that, across the whole book, not just Lucy, but every character, the whole narrative is like a joke every other sentence. So you got to kind of work with that a little bit, which is whatever, but it's every single child has that bit of like, he picks these character traits that give them this honesty and give them this sensitivity that, they're not all the same, but you can connect with them so completely. Like, I connected with every single one of these characters, and they all got to have their moment. Linus got to have his moment at the end with Extremely Upper Management, where he rants about every single kid one after the other and everything they were able to face and overcome. And you're like, wow, I am actually invested in all these characters, some more than others, obviously. There's one that just eats buttons, but collects buttons and bites them.
Doesn't eat them.
He doesn't eat
them.
He hoards them. He bit one some credit for that. But that's yeah, that's the point I was trying to make. Is it's a mask for their emotional insecurity, which maybe it's still a little over the top, but at least it's honestly built into the character. It's like they're the son of the devil. They know what people think of them. They know how to make people uncomfortable, and that's better than trying to let them in and risk getting hurt.
Yeah, that's well said, Charles. They each have kind of their own defense mechanisms and ways that they uniquely deal with their insecurities. Maybe not each, because it feels like, I don't know, does Talia have any insecurities that are detectable? I mean, she has lived like over 200 years, so
Right.
I think you work a lot of stuff out by that point. But it's
Yeah,
like
she's
Sal,
learned a lot from Arthur Panassis, you know?
Yeah. But someone like Sal obviously has huge insecurities, and rather than like going sort of outward the way that Lucy deals with his insecurities, where he's like, oh, I'm gonna like make a big scene out in the world, I'm gonna like say all these edgy things. Sal goes inward and quite literally turns into a small dog when threatened. And I think that his his arc really tugged at my heartstrings in a way that even the Lucy arc, maybe you'd consider Lucy like the main character among the kids, like Sal actually, who's been through so much, actually willing to open himself up eventually to Linus. And even those, like, I love the subtlety of the moments where these characters make progress, where again there's this temptation that you could have to go over the top with like how Sal might react to
He might, the
like,
guy's trying to excise
like,
Lucy, and Sal pushes him off the cliff and he falls to his death, you know?
Sure. But I'm thinking about Sal's moment with Linus where he's like, oh, can you help me move my typewriter out from my closet into my main room, which is this like, oh, I'm kind of like going a little closer out into the world now, and like it's okay if when you're walking by my room you can hear that I'm clacking away on the typewriter, and like I'm trusting you, Linus, to help me with this thing that is so important to me.
And they made a point
like
to say he could probably move it on his own and didn't really need help, but asked for it anyway. It's the incredible nuance of that whole moment is well identified, Dylan.
Yeah, and you could have such a like bigger event, but I think it makes the moment feel bigger, that we're not distracted by all these other elements. And TJ Klune really trusts the reader to be like, oh wow, like the moving of a typewriter is huge here. And I think that's one of Klune's strengths, is that ability to make moments that feel so so big out of events that are relatively small, where it's like we're so used to, as like epic fantasy readers, it's like these gigantic moments, and it's like I'm more invested in the moving of a typewriter than I am in some epic fantasy books over like the outcome of a giant battle. And that's really huge props to Klune for his ability to do that.
100%. And when we say that we, love characters above almost all else in a story, it's moments like these. And I can't tell you how many TV shows I've seen, especially fantasy TV shows, where they'll, like, the writers just completely miss this concept of we get so much more out of a character in these small, intimate moments than we ever could of them just going from duel to duel, or talking in the castle being like, things have changed since you've been away, you can't trust people like you used to. It's this thing I desperately crave in a fantasy story. It's like, just let these characters be the characters and let their victories be their victories. And to your point, Dylan, that just Sal asking the question, "Can you help me move the bookcase?" is such a more profound, honest moment than he could have done if he like all of a sudden like defended the whole team by speaking up and puffing out his chest and fighting somebody. You know, it's like there's a huge victory here, and I think TJ Klune's restraint but also deft hand had huge payoffs in this story, especially when it's so much about like families and relationships, and like especially when it's trying to be so relatable and connect with you so emotionally. It's like that. So many great decisions being made in the characterization. And I think that moment with Sal is a great example of that.
Restraint's a great word for it, Charles. And how many times on this podcast have we read a book that no one dies in? I believe that is extremely
The Wizard of
rare.
Earthsea, like
No, someone dies in. I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but there's
there are
definitely
deaths.
at least
Yeah,
one
that's
character
true.
that.
There's just no like.
I
no
mean,
one
the way
gets
it's approached
murdered.
is different. Yeah, that's fair. It's a different. It's. I think
There's no violence.
The sentiment
There's no war.
of Wizard of Earthsea is that it's not about like battles and murder and that kind of typical fantasy thinking. It is like a more intimate character driven story, much like The House in the Cerulean Sea in that way. But yeah, I think unless I'm completely mistaken here, no one dies in The House in the Cerulean Sea at all, even through even through non-murdery means. And I just don't. Maybe there's another book where that happens that we read on here, but we've read a lot of books. We've done at this point significantly over 200 episodes. I can't think of one right now.
Nothing's
So
coming to
that
mind.
is.
I don't want to even say any names because I'm afraid to spoil something. But
right.
I don't think so.
Right. So restraint, to be able to trust that. Obviously, this has transcended just fantasy readers by quite a bit. I mean, like you said, has all of those bestseller lists under its belt and all of that. But he didn't know, I assume, when he was writing this, that it would necessarily span that much beyond the fantasy community, and to trust that fantasy readers will be invested when the stakes are kept this low in the sense of the actual events happening, that the readers will buy into the stakes of these more emotionally driven, character driven, relationship driven aspects of the story. So I don't know, I'm extremely impressed. Like I love this book, so I want to make sure I'm properly effusive about it.
Right, I agree 100%. It's definitely a standout for TJ Klune's writing. Like I've never read any of his books before, and I'm a big fan now. It's rare to see an author with this much like skill and heart when it comes to characterization. Like, and it's not just like over the top good vibes, which I know it says on every description and review of this book, but it's the nuance, it's the endearment, it's the honesty that he's able to bring to it as well. It's just such a hard thing in my mind to pull off in a story, and it's a rare thing that you're able to do. And it's when you're able to create those moments honestly that you can really connect with a reader. And I was thoroughly entertained by this book. I never found myself like counting the pages between chapters or looking at the end or this or that. I was just along for the ride, and it was just really great. And we were talking about Linus Baker, and one of the things I forgot to mention during that conversation was I was reading TJ Klune's background, a bio about him. He's an ex-claims examiner for an insurance company. Did you know that? So
I did not know that, but it makes a lot of sense.
You can see some of that
and
influence.
I'm sure he's drawing heavily from that experience as being someone who actually cares about people while trying to.
He's like, well, if I'm following the rules, I would deny this
like,
insurance claim. But it's like, do you realize what happens when you like deny an insurance claim? Like people might be destitute.
Yeah.
Know?
Well, in Fight Club, where that's relatively similar to Edward Norton's position in that movie, where he's like talking about how he works for a car company and he looks into like these issues, like let's say there's a brake issue or whatever. I can't remember the name of his position, but he's like, yeah, we have this equation for like how much money we would lose in potential lawsuits if this were to get out, this issue that we're having and blah, blah, blah. And we compare that to like how much money the fix would cost. And if the amount of money that fixing this stuff would cost is lower, then we just like don't let anyone know that like these cars need to be fixed and we let people die. And it's like, it's such a soul-sucking thing to imagine dealing with when you actually care about people. And that's kind of Chuck Palahniuk's deal, is he's like soul-sucking. Right. I love Chuck Palahniuk's work, but yeah, Fight Club's originally a book by Chuck Palahniuk, if folks don't know. But yeah, anyway, it's it makes me think about that. And I'm sure it's ridiculously difficult to be in that position. And I'm sure he's also drawing heavily from that experience when he does this like excellent satire of like corporate environments, bureaucracy, and exactly. So
like the mouse pad, the stain on the shirt, the like dealings with management.
Extremely upper management is such a great like name for these folks. And the way he talks about it, it's like I never see them except like once a year they'll serve us crappy food and like make a big deal out of the fact that like us over here in extremely upper management are serving you food. Like, look at how much humility we're demonstrating.
Right. Even like the coworker that he sat next to, the whole time he comes back and it's like, oh, thank goodness. I thought you were fired. I don't have to do your work. Here it is. I didn't do any of it.
Right. It's so well written because it's like he sees like, oh, wow, there's a little bit of relief in his face. Like, maybe I was missed here after all. And then it turns out that the relief is just like, oh, yeah, like I had to cover your cases and it was so overwhelming for me.
He didn't even know what happened to him.
Just a reminder that no one cares at all about him, and how much I contrast from the way that he felt so cared for back when he was at the house in the Cerulean Sea.
I will say, as a millennial, you see the guy, just trying to do a good job in corporate America. Not, still not. He did have a house though, which I was like, ooh, this guy's got his own house, like living by himself in a home. That's pretty cool. And then it's like, oh, now he's like okay money. Beachfront property here, like on a private island. Like, this is pretty sweet. I guess that that
he's
like,
doing pretty well for himself.
Millennial generation, it's like, wow, how could he afford a home? But
yeah, right.
That was more improbable than the son of the devil being in the book. I'll say that.
Oh, much more improbable.
It's like single income, like not even like management position. Guy's got his own house.
Yeah,
he does have to take a bus
stretched
far away.
Right. Yeah, that definitely
suspension of disbelief.
Stretched my suspension of disbelief more than Chauncey the like slime person
the unidentified blob
wants to be a bellhop.
I love that, by the way. That was
so I love Chauncey was like maybe stealing my favorite character in the book, because just like he's just always groveling for tips. It's like I love
the overwhelming
enthusiasm, and his demand,
the infectious enthusiasm that he has for something so modest,
Right, the demand that Linus lets Chauncey do his laundry is like so funny. And Linus is like, if you insist.
He's like, but you'll have to tip me.
It's such a like, I don't know. Klune has this ability to write this kind of like that's so random humor that actually hits without being cringy, which is like, that
So
is
true,
tough. Like
dude.
the
So
so
true.
random humor is like,
God,
it's
you're
a delicate
100%
line
right.
to walk without being cringy. And yeah, the like, it's so random that Chauncey would be like obsessed with the idea of being a bellhop, but then it's like, okay, this is actually like, this joke is hitting and it's
Yeah,
hitting
and
over
there's
and
like a
over again.
payoff where
Like, I
he
love it.
meets a real bellhop and like
Yeah.
melts into a puddle or something. It's like I didn't even know he could do that.
Yeah, and
And he
he's
gets the
like,
hat.
all I did was tell him. Yeah, he's like, all I did was tell him that like he was the greatest person to ever live,
Yeah.
and he gave me a
Oh,
hat.
yeah. So true. Yeah, that's 100% right. I can't tell you how many, especially with like newer authors or first time authors or younger authors, even in TV too. Like this mark is missed so when they're like trying to write for younger audiences. It's like it's so easy to miss the mark with the humor and just be like, "Ooh, that's so random." But you're 100% right. I'm just coming to this realization. TJ Klune is like an example of all those people wish they could do what TJ Klune has done in this story. They wish they could do it.
For sure. I mean, just trying to think of other things that are able to hit that note. It's like SpongeBob was the old school SpongeBob was really good. And just
Right,
like
right.
random crap would get thrown in, and it's like, oh my god, but it's so
But
funny.
now you got new
But
SpongeBob where you're
it's
like random crap is thrown in and you're like it's missing a
and
something.
it's not funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. Oh god, it's yeah, it's really tough what's happened to SpongeBob, isn't it?
But I
And
guess, but you know, at the end of the day, no cartoon is ever as child's cartoon was ever as successful as that one. So at a certain point, you're like,
yeah,
how bad can you feel for SpongeBob?
once you get your own costume in my favorite video game, Fall Guys,
Oh gosh.
you know you've made it, and you see you see a lot of SpongeBob's running around in that game.
You sure do.
Yeah.
Do you think TJ Klune is in a fight club?
Uh, I don't doubt it.
I mean, it's
Wait, why?
always the
Is it just because of the?
You know, he
It's
works
just
as
because of what I was talking about earlier.
yeah, he works as the next examiner for an insurance company, and it's always the like publicly positive, wholesome people that probably are going out and joining fight clubs on the side. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just suspicious now.
Yeah, I
That'd be an
mean,
interesting
you
development
could,
for his character.
yeah. If he was in a fight club, I think that would get even more attention put on his work. In the end, it'd be, I think, probably worth it. He should join a fight club.
Hmm. Yeah, I would support that. I think that'd be cool. Because then he can just drain out all of the aggression and then come back and nurture the wholesomeness of his stories. I think that's good.
Yeah, I'd like to see him fight Chuck Palahniuk, who's definitely in a fight club.
We just have a. We
Yeah.
should just have.
He's just beating the crap out of him. And he's like, I just want to destroy something beautiful.
I don't know. I'd take that action. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
But
So anyway, we didn't talk much about Arthur.
Mhm.
That's which is interesting. Just Arthur has like no real negative points about him except he like hides himself but for good reason from those around him, except I guess hiding the fact he's a phoenix from the kids was like kind of surprising from him. So he does get these moments where he also like I guess this is part of what makes this book hit so well is like the idea of accepting and coming into yourself is basically what all the characters are going through. Even the one that seems most secure,
even the
in
adults,
Arthur,
not just the
is
kids.
still, yeah, even the adults, not just the kids, except Talia, who just is kind of like at this point self-actualized. But if we all had 200 plus years,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
And she had her moments,
other than that,
She won over the mayor with her gardening abilities, and she's nicer to
right?
Mr.
You know
Baker.
what?
She holds Mr. Baker's hand, like she's,
she does like let people see her garden.
Yes.
Which was like, she wasn't down. Like, she invites someone to see. Was it Helen that she invites
the mayor,
to see her garden? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then, all right. I'll give her that.
Absolutely.
Theodore lets Linus see the horde, and also
gives back his prized button.
Gives back, that. I mean, and it's again one of these moments where it's like one character giving another character something so small is made to feel so big in a way that feels natural. Again, that's, I think, Klune's specialty. Maybe
right, even with maybe anything. The characters that get very minimal screen time, he's still able to, make that trick happen. He's still able to work some magic on the characters, even if they get considerably less page time than others.
Yeah, that's a really impressive thing to do.
And I don't know what your thought was, but the minute they mentioned, because it was clear to me that something was obviously going to be up with Arthur from the very beginning. It's like he's not just a dude. And then the minute they mentioned that Phoenix exists, I was like, oh, he's a Phoenix, like done deal, like almost instantly.
No, I don't know. I knew when that happened that there would be a Phoenix at some point, but it was early enough in the book that I didn't necessarily know that he'd be the Phoenix, and I kind of like stopped thinking about the Phoenix thing after that. And I think that, I don't know. I knew he'd be a magical being.
Right.
Because when they were like, oh, there's a secret about him, I'm like, okay, so he's also a magical being. Right. Did not think of Phoenix necessarily, although looking back at that one line, I was like, oh, that makes total sense. That's pretty impressive they picked up on that. I think that the book has these like sort of telegraphed things about it that still work really well. Like the fact that Arthur and Linus are going to get together at the end, or at some point before that, I was like, I would have bet my life savings on that. It is super telegraphed. There's basically only two adult characters, or like two adult male characters and we know that this is like being wrapped up in a big gay blanket, according to V. Schwab. So like there has to be a relationship that develops there, and it's just sometimes you see from the start the way that one character like thinks about another character and like, ooh, he likes him. Right. And I think it's interesting. Maybe I'm jaded at this point because I've read so many fantasy books and I've just seen so many characters get together and develop relationships. And I think I feel like the magic of like rooting for two characters to get together has dwindled for me. You have to really write like a good relationship and two characters that really like need each other, and you see how they fit together and how one makes up for the other one's flaws and vice versa, and they're greater than some of their parts. Like all that stuff needs to be in place, or I'm just gonna like not be that invested in them getting together. Right. But even though I knew that Arthur and Linus were going to get together, the fact, like just the way that Klune wrote those two characters in a relationship, I still was like, oh my god, I was really rooting for them in a way that doesn't happen to me as much as it used to.
It's true, and it's interesting because we talk so much about Linus and how he was able to kind of break down that self-isolation a little bit, and I feel like the same thing was happening with Arthur, even though he presented a very confident father figure to a lot of people, and he was a leader that a lot of people really liked, and he had an impact on a lot of people. He was still holding back a part of himself, and he had that previous relationship with the gentleman from extremely upper management, whose name was Charles, by the way. I don't know how I feel about that. Being
Do you
portrayed
take that
as
as a personal attack?
like one of the few villains in the most wholesome story of all time. Like, come on.
Yeah, that's that's a tough stitch for you, Charles. And that's one of the first characters named Charles that we've come across, and
it is one of
it's
the
not
few.
speaking well to the character of people named Charles.
I know, but
I'm a little suspicious of you actually now.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it is what it is. But if anything, it's interesting to show how Arthur had to. He didn't even, like, both characters don't even realize that they have these shells they need to come out of, and that they've repressed parts of their selves for so long, and it's only the two of them exchanging their philosophies, being open and honest with each other, and like having love for the children that are their wards and this and that they were able to bring their full selves out to each other. And I think that's why the story is so, like, intimate and I'm going to say wholesome again, expressive, like all of those things. Because
wholesome's a good word for it, though.
Wholesome's a good word for it, because even though Arthur Parnassus presents more like the hunk in the Lifetime movie, it's like, oh, I'm a billionaire who lives on a secluded ranch and does woodworking, and your car broke down.
I don't know if he has as much money.
Hey, he's got a house in the Cerulean Sea. That's pretty. You could be worse off. But yeah, no. But he was isolated, and he had to admit some of the things about himself, and like the way he was isolating the children because he was avoiding his own anxieties about opening up, just like the children. Or he was able to help the kids, but he didn't. Linus was able to help him, and I think that's what made those final payoff moments really pay off. And their relationship was so subtle. I mean, it was obvious but subtle at the same time. And it wasn't like this. The whole story wasn't built on this will they, won't they. It was a very natural progression. A lot of other stuff was happening.
Yeah.
And then when they got together, it wasn't like, well, obviously they were going to get together, like it was like, oh, this is so great. I'm so happy for them, kind of a thing. Like, this is a great moment. So all of that together.
Right. It was not a will they, won't they. It's a they will. But the process of watching it unfold is so worthwhile, and the way it was written was so well done. I mean, again, the moment of like a character grabbing another character's hand becomes this huge moment, and it goes to show how awesome Klune's writing is. And I definitely walk away from this one thinking, hey, I gotta check out this guy's other work, because I mean, we talk about voice on this podcast a decent amount. I mean, we even off the air have had a lot of conversations about like, what does voice mean when it comes to an author? Because I think a lot of agents and like editors and folks like that in the industry, they might tell you that voice is the most important thing when it comes to like, are we going to invest in this author? And it's such a nebulous idea, but you know it when you see it. And Klune has so much voice. There's no one writing the way that he writes. I don't even know what to compare it to. Like, it's like, I don't know, like the whimsical humor aspect of it. Like, I can see how you might put that as like a descendant of Terry Pratchett. But if I'm going to be honest, this hits a lot better for me than does Terry Pratchett's work. And Pratchett's work was written a long time ago, and sense of humor changes over time and all that. But yeah, I don't even really know who else I would compare it to exactly. Oh, and on the Pratchett topic, just as an aside, similar element with like Good Omens, with the use of the like Antichrist boy. Although we don't say Antichrist around here.
Oh, how dare you.
But yeah, the son of the devil as a boy that I
Yeah.
don't know, plays a central role in the story. But anyway, yeah, I'm just trying to say Clune's voice is really impressive, and when someone has fantastic voice, it makes you want to read anything they write.
I would agree. Like it's hard to find a lot of stuff to compare this to. I see like I forget the actual. It's like Pedigree School of um, like Peculiar Children. You know that story. Apparently, like
Oh, Miss Peregrine's
yeah, it's
School
Miss
for Peculiar
Peregrine's. Right,
Children,
right,
right?
right.
I never read the book, but I watched the movie way back. I could see that. I don't know if the book, like the, I could see it though. The like, I guess the similarities are they're more in like
It is a
plot
building filled
probably
of
than they are
peculiar
in,
children. Like that's for sure.
yeah, like, but I don't know. I can't speak to any comparison in terms of voice or anything like that. But definitely could see this as being a recommendation for fans of Miss Peregrine's House for Peculiar Children or whatever. It's actually very similar and a good call.
Right, right. And then, you say Terry Pratchett, maybe also like a Douglas Adams kind of vibe where a more
Yeah.
like jokey, satire-ish kind of vibes, a more American style, I guess, but pretty much the same thing. But yeah, no, I totally agree. He's got not only does he have his own voice, he really just kind of has his own style. And it like permeates through even the book cover, which is such a standout
I was
as
literally
well.
just thinking about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Because, yeah, also all of his book covers look pretty similar. Like, I think it's called Under a Whispering Door or
Yep.
something,
Mhm.
which just, like, has a similar, I don't know why I want to say mouth feel. It's just, like, the
That
weirdest
is for
phrase ever.
that is for
It's
food.
just similar, like, just the way that it, like, sounds, like,
Style,
it comes out of
texture,
someone's mouth. Uh, yeah.
rhythm,
It is
meter.
rhythm is probably good. The rhythm of just like the house in the Cerulean Sea, Under a Whispering Door is like very similar sounding, and the way that the covers look, I literally just assumed that the Under a Whispering Door was a sequel before
Right.
I later found out. Like before I read the book, I was like, under that impression, and I believe my girlfriend told me that they were not, and I was like, and because I'm an ass, I was like, are you sure? And then I looked and I'm like, all right, I'm an idiot.
I see what you're saying though, because they both have like these interesting architecture, like houses, very much like the same style, angular, remote,
Yeah.
colorful homes and everything. So I see it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree. It's definitely a whole style, and it seems to be going quite well, and I'm super excited to see that. It's great to have like a talented person doing something different, getting critically acclaimed, so I'm super happy for that. I'm super appreciative of this story for kind of breaking up our reading pattern.
It was much
I was
needed.
very thankful for that experience. I'm so glad I included it in our fantasy books to take on vacation, even though I had only read the first 10-15%.
Perfect rec.
Perfect vacation book. I'm so happy that the ending came out just like I thought it was going to, and it lived up to that recommendation, and I stand by that now, having finished the story. That I would definitely, it's so short and so fun to read that you could take that on the beach, and the setting too is also kind of
Yeah, the
beachy,
setting.
vacation.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. So the whole thing was just great.
When I was in Florida, I was on the beach reading The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne, which is like a cold Nordic setting. And I posted a picture of it, like me reading that book on the beach, and people were like, there could be no like more different a match between like where you are, what you're
setting.
doing, and what you're reading.
Yeah.
I was like, that is very fair. So I would feel a lot
Well,
more
you could have read
comfortable with
Cold from the
recommending.
North because you were warm in the South, So
I did read D.W. Ross's Cold from the North when I'm pretty sure I made the exact same joke that you just made when we did our episode on that. I did say I read it when I was like hot in the South or warm in the South. Hot in the South sounds a little
Hot in the South sounds a bit.
appearance.
It also sounds a bit
it also
like
sounds
X-rated. Yeah.
Yes, okay, I figure. Now, warm in the South also sounds raunchy. I just don't think we're gonna be able to get away from that discussion. So I'm just gonna move towards something else and say, what a great book House in the Cerulean Sea is.
Book. So good, and highly praised. It was such a great experience to read, on top of the fact that it was a good story, and I'm looking forward to checking out Under the Whispering Door. I see another book, The Lives of Puppets, has a 2023 publication. Expected on April 25th, 2023. So there you go. It's coming out in like 11 days. So there you go. Who would have thought we'd be so timely?
This might release like
the week it comes out.
This might release, if not like close to the day.
Right? Like let's check the schedule here. So Monday's going to be.
It depends because
it will be the day before.
On Tuesday, so it'll come out the day before.
It'll come out the day before.
Unless we decide to release it on Tuesday for some reason, but I assume we'll just do Monday because.
So, check it out. Let's read the description here. In a strange little home built into the branches of a grove of 3 trees live 3 robots.
Is every book Klune writes a strange little, like a strange little home or whatever?
A remote home, yeah, because this one is like literally like tree houses, yeah. Fatherly inventor, android Giovanni Lawson, a pleasantly sadistic nurse machine, and a small vacuum desperate for love and attention. So you got the found family, eclectic cast, remote exotic location. You got all the ingredients for the epic mouthfeel of a wholesome story, right, Dylan?
That did not have good ear feel hearing you say that.
Well, now you know what I had to experience.
Yeah, I was having a conversation yesterday with a couple other students in my PhD program, and one of them kept telling me how they hate the sound of the word troubleshooting. I don't know. That's not one that's ever
hate is a strong
been
reaction.
an issue for me. Yeah, he was passionate about his distaste for that word. And he was talking about how
that's gotta be tough.
he had a stats. Oh yeah, he was like, I had a stats teacher's assistant in like my first year class, who's actually the stats teaching assistant, also a friend of mine and a fantasy fan. I won't name them. And yeah, they're like. And they just kept using the word troubleshoot like 2 or 3 times a day, like during the class. And I was like, okay, I could see that being a lot. And
yeah, I can see now once you start to notice it, and then it kept like this self-fulfilling prophecy of like, he keeps saying it. That can get annoying, no matter what the word is.
Yeah, so that, and he was like, I felt like she was leveraging her power over, like, he was joking, but he was like, I feel like she was leveraging her power over me to make me listen to the word troubleshoot like over and over again.
Just like diving into your fears, right? And isn't that what Arthur Parnassus tried to do for some of the kids? Like, or to Linus?
Are you seriously trying to relate this back to the book? It's a noble effort there, Charles.
Well,
I respect it. You're a master of your craft of podcasting. But once we start chopping it up about the... Yeah, some people don't love when I say that. But once we start chopping it up about the we're troubleshooting. We're probably nearing the end of an episode. I think I've said what I want to on the House in the Cerulean Sea here. One of my favorite books that I've read this year for sure.
Wow.
And
I would agree.
I highly recommend to... I mean, you are at the end of like an hour and 5-minute episode where we spoiled the book, so maybe this is not the time.
Consider checking the other books. That's how I got into the whole thing with the other books.
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you for troubleshooting my issues, Charles. I am definitely going to want to check out those other books. I recommend you do too. And I recommend you keep spreading the love about the House in the Cerulean Sea. It's definitely getting a lot of love already, but it can always use more, just like a child living in an orphanage on the sea.
Well said, Dylan. And I think the only thing to do now is to play that sweet, sweet outro music. What do you say?
I say let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
Okay. Thank you all, one and all, so much for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today...
That's us.
That's us. Let us know over on social media. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 on the end on Twitter. Let us know what you think over there. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they're already supporting us over on social media, but they want to support us even further, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can now do on Spotify, where most of you are listening. It's just 2 clicks over there at the top of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed, and helps us so much when you do that. You can also rate and or review over on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate any folks who take the time to write up kind words about FTF. It always puts a smile on my face and presumably on Charles's face as well.
You presume correctly.
You don't have to make Charles smile. Just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
You don't have to, but you already did just because you listened all the way to the end. Thank you all so much for doing that. We love you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.